parents would come in with their child, I started counting how many times they told a child not to do something. Don't play with the doctor's tongue depressors and sit in your chair. And I remember the record was 23 times in an hour. They said no to their child. You know how many times the child listened to them?
Zero.
The children are there to teach you how to be a better person. If you're acting like the government and you're forcing people to eat broccoli, any self-respecting child will give you a hard time. Food fights are never about the food. They're about autonomy or the right to choose.
Tom, thanks for joining me.
Good to be here again, Alec. Hope you're doing well.
Doing well. It's always a pleasure to chat with you.
Well, that's good. Yes.
So today I would like to focus primarily on common sense child rearing, unconventional wisdom for a nourished childhood, which I believe, why do you laugh at that?
It's this funny title. It wasn't my suggestion, that title, and just to hear it, you say it, sounds like a mouthful.
I like it. I like the title. I think it makes sense, especially because so much of what you talk about is related to nourishment. So I like it. That's good.
Good.
You know, as a dad of 3 myself, I have a 9-year-old, a 5-year-old, and a 15-month-old. Obviously, this topic is pertinent to me, pertinent to many of the people that listen to this podcast. So I'd like to start by asking you about the inspiration for writing this book now. Like, what was the reason you decided it's time for me to share my thoughts on parenting and child rearing and raising children?
Okay. So how it happened is probably 8, 9 years ago, maybe 7. The woman who was my editor at Chelsea Green, where I wrote 3 books, who's a very good editor, she really helped those 3 books a lot. I happened to be coming home from a Weston Price conference that she was at. And we ended up, she lived in Vermont. I lived in New Hampshire at the time. Wait a minute. No, it couldn't have been. I was living in California. Anyways, we ended up at the airport at the same time waiting for a flight, not the same flight. And so we had like an hour to talk, and she started telling me about, which I didn't know any of the story, about her adopted son and all his troubles. And it sounded like a lot of troubles. And so I listened and gave her some sort of suggestions. And she said, you should write a book called How to Raise Healthy Children in a Toxic World. I think that was the title. And I said, yeah, I used to joke that if they gave Worst Parent of the Year award, I would have been up for the running numerous times. The other thing I used to say about parents was the role of a parent is to give their children something to talk to the psychiatrist about when they're older. And most parents are really good at it, including myself. So anyways, I went home and sort of forgot about it. But a few months later, I just decided to write the book. And typically when I write a book, and I know Linda's always remarking on this, it takes me about 2 weeks. And I've written some that aren't published, and I write them longhand, like in just a thing I get from Staples or somewhere. And then I hire somebody to put it on the computer. And so I wrote it, and I actually liked it at the time. So I sent it to Brianne, typed up, and she liked it. And she submitted it to the Chelsea Green board or whoever, and they said no. They wouldn't publish it. And I'm not sure why. First, they didn't say anything. And then like a year later, we ended up having a meeting. And she still didn't say why. She just didn't like it. And so that was the end of it. And I put it on the computer, and occasionally I mentioned it at something like, oh, I wrote this book. And so people would ask me if I could send it to them. And it was minimally edited. And I think actually Linda might have edited. And Linda it's probably too long of an answer, but Linda was a professional editor,
I know
like
she's
big
edited
time.
some of my articles for me, and I didn't even ask her to. She reached out and said, "Hey, you made some mistakes here." She's texted me over here.
Yeah. She was like a founding editor of USA Today and the feature editor at the Chronicle. So she's no joke when it comes to editing. So anyways, I think she did look at it a little bit. So I sent it to some people and they all seemed to like it. And then I was at another conference and the guy who's the owner of the Rudolf Steiner Press, which I would say have a kind of an adversarial relationship with. I told him about it and he said, oh, we might want to publish it. And so I sent it to him and he said he would. And so that's why I said, then he changed the name of the book. And so that was like 8 years ago. So I had to rewrite a lot of the stuff, because I think a lot differently now than I did 8 years ago about a lot of things. And there was a few things I ended up leaving in, which I regret, which I would have changed. But in order to get it into the Rudolf Steiner Press, I had to keep them, so.
What were some of those things? What were some of the things that you wouldn't have published now?
I mean, I would not have a positive recommendation about going to a Waldorf school.
Yeah, understandably.
Or the philosophy behind the Waldorf school sort of movement. But anyways, I decided that it was worth it. It wasn't worth it to go down that road, so I left it.
Got it.
So that's how it came about. And so there we are.
There we are. One of the things that you do a good job of in the book is describing how modern parenting has basically become government at home. And this is the concept.
That's a good way to put it.
Yeah, it is, right? And this is a concept I want to explore, especially because a lot of my audience is understandably in the health and freedom and, alternative so-called space. And we're trying to figure out what parenting looks like because we see the way government is, we see the way that parenting has been done that has led to this version of a collective society, which is all ass backwards. And we're trying to explore what is the appropriate approach? Because on one hand, I'll just share some examples. I have some friends who say they know some other people. I don't know anyone personally, but they know some other people who basically took a quote gentle parenting approach and never told their kids no. And now those kids are teenagers and they've basically become hellions where they essentially will not take no for an answer in a sort of unhealthy way, though. Where they lack boundaries, they lack an ability to reason with other adults. So I guess a big open-ended question is, for those who are in the health and freedom space, what do you see now, sort of in hindsight, as a grandpa, and you're watching your kids as parents, as the appropriate role of a parent in the sort of wellness and freedom space for those who are already like-minded?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's funny because just in the last couple of days, I've been having conversations for just random sort of reason. I mean, I went to a potluck on 4th of July, so I had conversations with people. And one of them was about how different it is when we grew up. And I'm sure you've heard that. But I think my first real bicycle, I was probably 10 or so. And so that gave me freedom to go where I wanted. And if I was 11 and I would go out, on Saturday morning and take my bicycle, if my parents had asked me, like, so where are you going? I would have probably said, like, who wants to know? Because it would have been a ridiculous question. Like, why should I tell you where I'm going? They told me that dinner was at 6 and I could eat it or not, but if I wanted to eat dinner, I'd have to come home at 6 because they weren't going to wait and feed me later. And I mean, so we could go wherever we wanted, which never happens today, as far as I can see. Never. But here's the real my answer to your question, and it's in the food fight story, because that tells you that it gets you out of the dilemma of a person who never says no. And by the way, when I was doing doctoring, and so it was all in person, because that's how you did life. It was so interesting to me. Parents would come in with their child, and often it was a child who was behavior problem or some physical problem. And I would actually, at the end, I started counting how many times they told a child not to do something. Like, don't play with the doctor's tongue depressors and don't sit in your chair, etc. And I remember the record was 23 times in an hour. They said no to their child. You know how many times the child listened to them?
Zero.
So it doesn't work. It doesn't work. So one of the things I told parents, their prescription was, for the following 4 weeks until you come back or tell me, you get to say no twice a week. And when you say no, you better win. So in a way, so here's the food fight thing. I had food fights. Everybody had food fights, right? That meaning your child won't eat what you want them to eat. And so I ended up thinking, first of all, realizing that food fights are never about the food. They're about autonomy or the right to choose, right? So I have the right to choose what I want, and I don't eat food I don't like. And no child should eat food they don't like or have to eat anything. So as soon as you stop coercing them, either punishments or rewards, like you can go outside if you eat your broccoli or something, then the autonomy question is over. They either eat it or they don't. And what happens then is the magical part, and the answer to your question is, once you do that step, and only if you do that step, will the child give you the right to choose what to feed them. Because if you don't let them choose what to eat, they will harass the crap out of you until you feed them what they want. But if you give them that right, there's nothing to fight about. I remember I really got this with my youngest son, Joe, and he ended up saying, so you're not going to force me to eat broccoli? And I said, Joe, how am I going to force you to eat it? He said, well, you won't let me go outside and bounce on the trampoline or something. I said, I don't care. Bounce if you want to, but I'm not going to give you something else. Right? If you don't want to eat it, you just go outside and play and come in hungry or whatever. And then he just ate it because he didn't care. And then eventually sometimes you say, I like, Brussels sprouts more than broccoli. So I gave him Brussels sprouts. And it's very easy then, because the children are there to teach you how to be a better person. And if you're acting like the government, it's a great way to put it, and you're forcing people to eat broccoli, any self-respecting child will give you a hard time. They should. In fact, when I was talking to them as patients, I would say you should give him a hard time until he stops doing that. And I thought that's what a lot of childhood illness was about, is, smearing their feces on the wall. That's what you do to somebody who doesn't know how to be a responsible, respect people's choices. You make their life miserable. And believe me, children are good at doing that. If you deserve it, they'll figure out a way because they know all your weak spots. So if you're somebody who doesn't like cleaning up messes, they're going to make a mess. And if you're into food, they'll fight you about food. And if you're into whatever you're into, they will figure it out and do that to help you realize that's not the way to be a normal adult. It's not the way you don't interact. You don't go to your friend and say, if you don't eat your broccoli, I'm going to smash your windows, right?
Right.
You don't do that.
Right. I think the struggle that a lot of people who have kids that are, in the health and freedom space face at this point is, again, they see the way the government is, so they don't want to be dictatorial like that, right? But then they have this almost guilty conscience lingering in the background, or this desire to be the best possible parent. I got to make sure my kids eat only organic foods. I got to make sure their circadian rhythm is aligned. I got to be this, X, Y, and Z, all these things, right? And they feel that pressure to make sure that their kids are healthy. So inevitably, they adopt the approach of government, ironically, in that I know what's best for you as a kid. So you need to do these things in order to be the optimal kid. But the irony is that's creating the exact same conditions that got us here in the first place, where we assume that we know better. Like talking about government assumes that we're all degenerates, we're all hellions, that we're going to be killing each other, we're going to be pillaging each other, stealing from each other, all these things, unless there is an authority in place to tell people exactly how they should be, which then leads to people not understanding how to listen to their own body, not understanding what's best for themselves, and then just mindlessly following government, which leads them down the wrong road, et cetera, et cetera. And it's creating the same conditions in the home, but it's such a tough thing when you do have an understanding of, okay, well, these Skittles are probably not going to be best for you. Being on this tablet for 6 hours a day is not going to be good for you. I understand that all of your friends are doing that, but it's not going to be good for you. So how do we go about reconciling those two basically contrasting realities there?
Yeah, I mean, these are great questions. And by the way, there's some things that I never had to deal with as a parent, with like screens. Like I didn't own a computer until my children were way out of the house.
Can I just share real quick from my perspective on that one? I just love, since we're speaking about screens real quick and we can get to the broader question. So I'll share what we're dealing with, right? So we obviously raise our kids a certain way. And the way we do that is we just don't have certain things in our house. We don't have certain things within their awareness, within their possibility of choices, the way that we do things. So there is no need to be authoritarian in that sense. Like you will not do these things because they're just not even available amongst the possibilities of, choices. But at the same time, we live in a neighborhood that each home has half an acre, so there's plenty of room for the kids to roam about. And what's nice about our neighborhood is that they do get a sort of 90s-esque, early 2000s-esque childhood in that they're always out riding bikes. There's plenty of kids in the neighborhood. But the flip side to that is that the way a lot of these other kids are raised is they're allowed unlimited access to screens. They're, obsessed with video games. One of the kids in our neighborhood, their family feeds them absolute dog shit food. And our kids go over there and they see what they're eating. Our kids go over to their houses. They see that they have virtual reality headsets and they're, offered unlimited access to those virtual reality headsets. And then they come back to us and they're like, why don't we have a virtual reality headset? Can I get a virtual reality headset? And then we try to find a way to navigate that where we're explaining to them the reason we don't allow those things in our homes or we don't purchase those things as parents. And then we're in this sort of battle constantly where it's like, here's how we do things at our house, and this is why. And I understand they do those things at their house, but this is where it leads societally. And they get it in some sense, but there's still that frustration that we don't have those things present in our home. So it becomes this constant battle with us as parents. So I just love to hear your thoughts on that. And I know you talk about screens in the book, and you kind of like, it's almost like depressing in reading that section. And it's understandably depressing because it's like, this is a societal problem. Like, there's only so much you can do as an individual at this point with access to screens because of the example that I just described. But I just love to hear your thoughts on that in general when it comes to those types of things.
Right. So let's do an easier one, which I did deal with, which was the food. And like I said, the fight is about autonomy. Now, there is an addictive quality to certain things like food and screens. So that makes it hard. But if a child says, "Oh, I want to eat Skittles," the reaction is, "Oh, good," or "That's fine." So can you get them? No, I don't eat Skittles, and I don't. It's to me, it's not good food. I don't eat it. It has to be that. Like if you're eating Skittles and the child says they want Skittles, you're screwed.
Yeah.
But if you're not eating, you don't spend your money on it, and I'm not buying it. And not in a punitive way. It's just a matter of fact, right? It's just a matter of fact. And so when you have a job, when you're 18 or whatever, you can go cut lawns and go buy yourself Skittles. And that's, I think, what you can do. And again, what I have noticed is that a lot of children, in fact, I think most, actually they don't really want to eat Skittles. They don't care that much about it. They just eat the food. If you give them good food and you know how to cook a little bit, and you give them fun, good food, they just forget about the food. And, I also got this when I lived in Swaziland, and I used to eat sometimes with the family. And there was one time when a child who was like 4 or so said something to the effect, I wasn't fluent in Siswati, but he doesn't like this porridge that they give. And immediately one of his older brothers took his bowl away and ate it. And if he had have said, which he might have, I want, a hamburger instead of slimy porridge with greens, they would have laughed and thought that was the funniest thing they'd ever heard. Nobody would have berated him. They just would have thought, that's like ridiculous. This is what we eat. This is what we can afford or what we like or whatever it is. In your case, this is what we choose to eat. You don't have to eat it. And any coercive energy on your part, they will discover and use it against you.
Yeah.
Their job is to get it so you just don't care. Your job is to provide them good food. You did it. Their choice is whether to eat it or not. And it turns out it's the same thing with screens. Now, if you're on your, phone all day and you say screens are bad for you, to me, what happens then is the child decides, oh, well, maybe he's right. And he's on this thing that's bad for him 6 hours a day. I better rescue him because they love you and they want to help you. And they're there to teach you a better way. And you're obviously doing something which you just said is going to fry your brain, right? That's what you told them is the reason why you don't want, and you're doing it. And so they're going to figure out, they're going to go and find a screen and act goofy. You see what happens? It fries your brain. You're right. Now you're going to stop or no? And so if you're not a hypocrite and you don't use screens and they say, I want a screen, you say, well, you get a job and get the subscription and the whole thing. I can't do it. Well, fine. Not you're a bad person. Now, what if so that doesn't solve the problem of they go to their friend's house and they use their screen 6 hours a day, as an example, I would probably move.
That's the easy answer. And it's so funny because that's what my wife has been saying. She's like, I kind of just want to move out into the country. That's what we had initially tried to do, but that's a whole long story. But the point is, that's what she's saying in response. Because at first, living in this neighborhood, we love that the kids are out riding bikes. There's no fear. Like, we have no worry about where our kids are. They're just somewhere out riding bikes or jumping on someone's trampoline or whatever it is. And then again, because of where society is at, the flip side of that is everything that I just mentioned. And it's such a weird conundrum to be in where we appreciate a lot of pieces of that. And then because other parents aren't as quote unquote conscious about what they allow into their home, it presents a lot of issues. And it's a weird thing to navigate these days.
It is. And it's, and everybody has to look at that situation. So it's better than some, right? Because there's a lot of places where you can't go outside but that's not ideal.
No.
And so you're living with people who are basically trying to harm their children.
Yeah.
And that's a problem. And so I would rather not be around that because there's no way you can win that.
No, it's a losing battle because especially from our kids' perspective, they see us and then the questions become like, why don't you have this in our house? Like, what's the deal? Are you trying to restrict us from this? That's like the subconscious thought that they develop.
Right. And there's the addictive quality, and that's going to be a tough one to win. But I wouldn't go so far as like with the food, because it's also not true. I used to think it was true that if you raise a child or an animal on only good food, they will instinctively not want to eat bad food. But Pumpkin taught me that he knows more than anybody else I know. He's my cat. He taught me that's not true because he only ate good food, and then somebody gave him kibble, and then we read something that you could get this organic kibble and it's okay, and so we gave him a little bit. Next thing you know, he only wanted to eat kibble, and we had to like wean him off. I mean, like cold turkey, no, you're not doing that anymore. And that really taught me that even they put stuff in there that's addictive. And he couldn't resist on his own. And so that's the problem with children too. So you just can't do it. But not because you're punishing them. It's just, I don't eat that stuff.
If you listen to this show, you are probably well aware that there's something seriously off with our modern food systems. And even a lot of food labeled organic isn't what it seems. Some of it's shipped in from China where regulations are murky at best, and other times companies slap the USDA organic label on while cutting corners and doing the absolute bare minimum in order to achieve that label. That's why Dr. Cowan's Garden exists. Founded by Dr. Tom Cowan, they believe health starts with food, real food, the way that it's supposed to be grown. They call their sourcing beyond organic, which means they're working with small family-run farms who are going above and beyond the USDA organic label when it comes to growing their food. These farms care deeply about soil health and nutrient density, and some are even biodynamic certified, the highest farming standard in the world. At Dr. Cowan's Garden, they use proper processing techniques that humans have used for thousands of years because they actually work. Nuts and grains are soaked or sprouted just as traditional cultures did. Olive oils and apple cider vinegars are never heated, preserving fragile nutrients. Olive oil is protected from light because oxidation matters. The list goes on and on. The products at Dr. Cowan's Garden are made to be deeply nourishing and also incredibly delicious. Foods that you actually enjoy eating and foods that make healthy decisions actually feel good. Dr. Cowan's Garden is not about fads, it's not about fear, and it's definitely not about following government health recommendations. It's about reclaiming a simple trust in your food. If you value transparency, tradition, and food that respects both your body and nature, head to drcowansgarden.com or just head to the show notes and use code THEWAYFORWARD for 15% off. your first order. Welcome back to Real Nourishment. I think that one of the biggest things is being able to explain why, right? Like for our kids, I'll just use an example with my oldest son. A couple years ago, notice, that other families allow other things. When we would go to birthday parties, there'd be cakes that are made with the worst of ingredients, and other kids would be having that. And at first we tried to be restrictive, like, no, you can't have that. We'll get you something different when you come back home, right? And then after some time, we felt that wasn't the best approach. And we just said, okay, go ahead. You can have some of that if you want to. And what he started doing on his own is he started realizing that this sort of food would make me a little bit agitated. And then we would have conversations about it, like, when you eat this cake or when you eat this candy, how does it make you feel in your body? And he also notices the same things with video games, when there's still that dichotomy of, he understands that after playing video games at his friend's house, he feels super anxious and agitated and he has trouble sleeping that night, but then he still has a desire to engage with it. So it becomes more of an open conversation where you're getting them to understand the implications of these things, rather than just strictly saying no because I said so, because we don't do that. And it allows them to cultivate that understanding on their own while still giving them autonomy. And is that the approach that works for every parent? I can't say that that's the case, but I know that that's been worked well enough for us, where on his own, he knows he doesn't want to eat that stuff, at least not as much. And that's the other thing too, is if you create a complex around it where you're so restrictive, naturally out of defiance, because they do want freedom and autonomy, they're going to want that shit even more. They're going to want that even more. They're going to try to find ways to get it behind your back. They're going to do whatever they can to get it. So it's like, it requires a balance with just open conversations with your kids. And they're so much more intelligent than most parents are willing to admit or understand, that like they can retain the information. They can understand when you can explain it to them. And it's all about pointing them back to what they experience in their own bodies, engaging with any of these things.
Right. And the only other thing, I mean, it's also very well said. The only thing I would say is, don't be a know-it-all. Just say, I looked into this, or I'm looking into it or thinking about it, and I'm just thinking it doesn't make me feel very good. I was just wondering what happens when you do it. Because as soon as you say you're not doing it because I said so, any child will choose to teach you a lesson. That is not how you treat other people. And they're going to do it just to get your goat. The whole point of this is, don't make doing stuff about getting your goat. Like, just make stuff like realistic. Like, do you actually want to do this?
Mm-hmm.
That's where you want. Do you want to ride your bicycle? Do you want to eat this food on its own merits? I mean, that's obvious. That's why you want to eat food, is because you like it and it makes you feel good. Not because you're teaching your father a lesson. But they'll do that, and they sort of have to, because you don't get it.
Yeah, and it's definitely not about like the quote unquote micronutrients and macronutrients that are in the food either.
It's not about. It's about teaching you how to be a better person.
Right.
And most parents have no clue, and they're like, exactly, they're like the government.
Well, it's the assumption
authoritarian assholes.
Right. And well, it's the assumption that we know better than our kids.
Yeah.
And I think that's the irony that a lot of people in this space are discovering, is that we're extremely conditioned and our kids are so unconditioned. So the best thing that we can do is, to the best of our abilities, without traumatizing them further, help them navigate life without becoming as conditioned as we were. Like, they're already perfect and whole when they're born into this reality. And we have the assumption that they're the degenerate ones that are going to be, prostitutes or shooting heroin, unless we tell them exactly how they're supposed to be. And the irony is that they come in teaching us.
Exactly. I used to say it like this. We have this idea that if we don't show them how to live, they're going to all be savages. And I tell you, it's again, Pumpkin cured me of that. Like, if I don't tell Pumpkin how to eat, he's going to be a savage. So it's not true. He knows. And I have certain standards. Like, I give him rabbit or venison or chicken livers, and he decides what to eat. Or he goes catch his own mouse and rabbits. And that's how I do it. And I 100% sort of trust which one he wants, or some combination.
So I guess with parenting, then it's about creating the container and allowing freedom of choice within that container.
Yeah. Your standards are, grass-fed meat is good and bone broth, whatever, and raw milk kefir. So you make stuff with those things in it. You put it on the table. You have a friendly, happy atmosphere like, oh, this is fun. We get to eat. Just like the Swazis did. Their container was a little less because they didn't have, they had porridge and slimy greens and occasional meat. And that's what they ate. And if you didn't like slimy greens, you didn't eat them. Nobody said, you better eat your slimy. I mean, they just understood that somehow these people are probably smarter than I am about food. They know you've looked into it a little more. So you probably made good choices. They trust you if you're not going to be an asshole about it. And they just eat it. Because otherwise, there's nothing to eat. And the idea of giving them like separate food is ridiculous. I mean, again, if they say they like Brussels sprouts more than broccoli, that's fine. That's that's the interesting conversation about food, right? Or I like this cut of meat more than that. And those things don't matter nutritionally, right? It's just the same. So fine.
Yeah, it's almost like you're recognizing that they already understand what so many of us have come to call "quote unquote" intuitive eating. They know what's best for them within those parameters that you have set.
Right.
Yeah.
If you think about it, you don't go to with a good friend to a restaurant and say, you have to eat this. You just don't do that. You don't treat people like that, except our children, we do. You have to eat the child's portion of this chicken wings or whatever. I don't like chicken wings. No, you have to eat them. Why? Like, you wouldn't do that to a friend, but we do it to our children and they make us pay as they should.
Do you think defiance is a natural part of adolescence, like towards parents, no matter what it is? Or do you think that's a function of parents attempting to be too authoritarian in their child's lives?
Yeah, the second.
You think it's the second?
Yeah. I mean, if you're not, there's no reason to be defiant against somebody who's, just, so how's life? It's good. I'm riding my bike and where are you going? I'm going to the park and I met this friend and we played baseball. I mean, what's to be defiant about? But if oh no, you shouldn't play baseball. People get hurt playing baseball. And you got to wear a thing with the thing over your face, and and if you don't, I'm not letting you play. Then, if you have any sense at all, you're defiant. Guy's an asshole. I'm not listening to him.
In the book, you talk about getting on your child's side. What do you mean by that specifically?
I mean, this came from a case, and it's always with me, almost everything I learned, especially in medicine and life, came from patients, interacting. So this little boy comes, and I had my strategy of seeing children as patients was, first of all, they only had one line to tell me why they were coming. Anything else I wouldn't read. I didn't want their family history. I didn't want anything. My child has oppositional defiant disorder. Okay. First grade Waldorf school. And the second rule was they come in and I sit the parent or parent down and with the child and say, the way I do it is I'm going to ask the child questions and they can say whatever they want, and don't help them. Don't say, talk to the doctor, or whatever. If he won't talk to me, that's my problem, right? You don't need to help. And you're not to interrupt no matter what. If the child says, I have 4 sisters, but they only have 2, you don't say, oh, Johnny, you actually only have 2 sisters. You just leave it alone. And then when we're done, I will ask you whatever to say whatever you want, the parent, and then the child can interrupt you and correct you if they want. And I'd say 90% of the children laughed when I said that because they never were in an encounter like this before. And then asked if they agreed. And the children always, and the parents had no choice because I wouldn't do it otherwise, right? So I have this child and he's sitting there, hat pulled down over his, 1-year-old, one first grade. Mother says he won't talk to you. Doesn't talk to people. Fine. So I asked him how he's doing. Nothing. And how do you like school? I hate school. What happened at school? They, so he goes on about they kicked him out of school because he threw a glass vase at a little girl. And so he's considered dangerous. And his parents are like on the board. So this was a huge crisis. So my other rule was I never asked why. What happened? Well, they were teasing my friend and I told them to stop and they wouldn't stop. And then I got frustrated and I threw this vase at this girl. Okay. And he said something like, and the teacher lied about what I was doing. And the mother says, oh, the teacher doesn't lie. And I looked at her like, if you say one more thing, and I just said, so what did she lie about? Well, she lied, said I was the one who did it and it wasn't me. They were teasing my friend and I don't like teasing my friend. And so he's going on about his whole story with school and everything he doesn't like. And I asked him, like, how is it at home? And he says, I'd rather be home. We just moved to a house and there's a creek and I catch salamanders and stuff. And there's a guy who wouldn't talk to me. And then I asked him a deliberately stupid question, like, how do you get along with your friends when you're at home? And that's a stupid question because I knew the answer. He said, what do you mean? I said, well, do you fight? He said, I mean, not really, like a little bit, just normal. Because I knew that he doesn't have any problem getting along with people. And eventually then, after 20 minutes of him going on about his life and the salamanders and the child who wouldn't talk to me, I said, I usually say I have one why question. So why'd you throw the vase at that little girl? He said, so they kicked me out of school and I get to go home. And then he said, after I said that, he looked at his mother and said, hey, he's on my side. And because I didn't say, oh, Joey, you're a bad person for throwing that vase. I mean, it made perfect sense. The guy's like a aspiring general, right? He had the strategy all worked out of how to get kicked out of school, and he carried it out, and it almost worked. And then I said, is there anything I can do for you? He said, yeah, go to the teachers and tell them to stop lying. I said, I'll see what I can do. And that was it. Then he stands up. I still remember. He stood up, put his hand out and said, thanks, mister. And walked out of the room. His mother is like, what just happened here?
Oh, man.
I said, he doesn't have opposition. He's a perfectly conversational, friendly guy who I'm sure gets along with his friends. He hates school because they're lying about everything. And so he tried to get kicked out. That's it. That's the whole story. And it turns out actually that he was willing to go as long as they would, treat him a little bit more fairly. So he actually was very, able to negotiate. Yeah. Yeah. He was reasonable. And, I don't remember what the question was. So that's what I meant.
Well, just being on your child's side. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm just here to hear your story. And I'm not, I had so many times where a child would say, I do, they pull the lead, do something that's horrible. And I never would say, oh, you're a horrible person. I just say, oh, why do you put sand in that sister's bed instead of the other sister's bed? Well, because this is the sister who torments me and pulls my pants down or whatever. So there was always a good reason for that. And instead of saying, if you put sand in your sister's bed one more time, you're grounded, or you're going to stay inside, or blah, blah, blah. Or even just the energy of you're a bad person. That's the opposite of being on your child's side. I assumed that they were doing something reasonable, and I just wanted to hear what was going on. And I tell you, literally 100% of the time, there was some sort of reasonable explanation that also, when you talk about it, they could say, yeah, maybe the next time I'll do it a little different.
Yeah. You know what comes up for me with this is that I think a lot of the times as parents, the reason we reprimand our kids, the reason we get so upset when our kids do something that's quote unquote bad is less about what they're doing and more about we take it as a reflection of us.
100%. I know that from personal experience. If Joe keeps doing this, everybody at this fair is going to realize what a shitty parent I am. That's why I did it. You can't do that anymore, Joe, because it's bad behavior, whatever it is. And he's teaching me, get off, I'm doing this because you have to stop thinking that what I do is because of you. I'm doing what I do. And if you force me to act this way to get you to stop thinking that, I will. Because, that's how I'm going to teach you to be a better person. But it's 100%. Everybody's going to realize how incompetent I am. And oh my God, my child acts like this. And what are my friends thinking? And oh my God.
We see it with one of the kids in our neighborhood who has a problem with lying almost habitually. He has these impulses sometimes. They'll be, playing on a water slide and he'll just push one of the kids and then sort of realize that he shouldn't have done that. And then when he's confronted about it, he's like, no, I didn't push him. And then the other kids are like, no, yes, you did. You pushed us. And what I've gathered, I don't have any direct evidence to indicate this, but what I've gathered is that when he does something bad in his home, quote unquote bad, right? His parents immediately reprimand him, immediately get on him for doing something bad. And then he has this desire to continue doing bad things, but then he's scared of the consequences from his parents for doing said bad things. So then he just habitually lies about the bad things that he's done. And it's like, I would imagine, and I can almost guarantee that those parents take it as a reflection of them when their child does something bad, rather than sitting down and having a conversation with him, not in judgment, not in an attempt to give him parental consequences for what he's done, but just to hear his story. Like, why did you do that? Help me understand. Is there a better way that we could go about that next time, possibly? I think that's so much of what it is like, You see it with government, for example, right?
Everybody's going to find out what a jerk I am, how incompetent I am.
Right. Right. Well, and then you see it with government where they'll just say, you need to vaccinate. Essentially, like, of course, they'll come up with nonsensical reasons, but it almost comes down to because we said so, right? And it's the same thing when it comes to parenting. We do this because we said so, rather than having an open conversation with your kids about why we do or do not do things, and not even coming from a I know better position, but coming from in my experience, this is what I have learned. And now you got to figure out what's best for you based on your own experience and based on, hearing from me as your guide, so to speak.
Yeah. And it comes from just all you have to do is not ask why initially and come from a place of curiosity. Like, walk me through what happened before you pushed that girl. Well, there was 6 people on the slide and I wanted to be first. And so where was she? She was ahead of me at number 1. And so what would happen if you were number 2? Well, she might like poop on the slide and then I have to slide down in the poop. Has she ever done that before? I'm not sure, but maybe somebody said she did it once. So that's actually not a bad reason, because I can get that. I don't want to slide down in a poop either. And so then you could say, well, maybe if you could just see if she pooped in the slide. But the reality is they already know that. They already know she didn't poop on the slide, and they're just that's just a cover for how to teach you to get off their back, and if you just leave it alone and just come from this place of, so what happened here? Just like I did with that. So tell me the story leading up to throwing the vase. He told me the story. And it was perfectly reasonable. It almost always is. Almost always. It's interesting with the correlation with the government because, it's like the thing with like rent control, right? So you have a house and you want to rent it, and you have to put certain money in to fix it up so people can comfortably live there. But you can't do that because the government says you can only rent it for $10 a month, and you would need $20 a month in order to do the improvements. So the guaranteed outcome of rent control is shitty houses.
Yeah. Yeah.
And because people won't fix it up because they can't get their money back. And so they do the rational thing of not fixing it up. And yet it keeps going. And, it's actually come to me as, this is a little bit off subject, but the principle is, the interesting way that gets argued is, yeah, but Alec, don't you think that people should have the right to have a good place to live? So the argument comes about intentions, right? Yes, I do think it would nice if they have a good place. You see, I won the argument. That's why we have rent control. But the rent control is a strategy to get that intention accomplished. Everybody has the same intention to have the children be happy and interact with children and not push them down the slide and not lie about stuff. It's the strategy of doing that. The strategy of berating them teaches them that the way to interact with people is to berate them. And so they do it. And then if you catch them and say, you're berating me. No, I'm not. I'm being a parent.
Yeah.
So they're lying about it, right? So that's what so he says, okay, that's the way you want to play this. First you berate people and then you lie about it. That's what I'm going to do.
Right.
I pushed her down the slide and then they said, did you push her? And I said, no, I didn't push her. That's what you did. You berated me for doing it. And then I said, you're berating me. You're acting like an ass. No, I'm not. I'm acting like a responsible.
Right.
No, you're not. You're lying. Either you're lying or you're so fucking stupid that just like the red control, you're either so stupid that you can't figure out that if you don't let people fix their place up, they're not going to rent a good place. Like, that's pretty stupid.
Really stupid.
So they lie about it.
Right.
Most of our modern lives are spent completely disconnected from the natural world. Artificial light environments, concrete, rubber soles on our feet, non-native EMFs everywhere. We have totally immersed ourselves in a completely unnatural world. Getting outside and putting your feet on the earth is actually vitally important for our health. And that's why I've worn Earth Runners for years, especially when I'm out in nature, whether I'm on a trail, hiking, fly fishing, camping, or just spending time outside at an event like Confluence with the earth beneath my feet. Earth Runners are minimalist sandals that are especially great when you're out in a natural environment. They have a wide toe box and a flexible sole that lets your feet spread, grip, and move naturally on uneven terrain, whether it's trails, grass, sand, or dirt. Instead of restricting your feet the way most modern footwear does, they allow your feet to engage naturally with the ground and move the way they were designed to do in a natural setting. What also makes Earth Runners unique is their conductive grounding design, which allows your body to reconnect with the Earth's natural negative charge while you walk. And as I've discussed on a variety of podcast episodes, negative charge is essential for your body's energy production. If you value getting outside, reconnecting with nature, and moving in a way that your body was designed to move while on natural surfaces, check them out. Head to earthrunners.com or just head to the show notes and use code FORWARD10 at checkout for 10% off. Again, that's FWRD10 for 10% off your order. If you're ready to rewild your health and walk in deeper alignment with nature, then check out Earth Runners and feel the difference from the ground up.
Speaking of lying, first off, I want to acknowledge like the way that you wrote this book with each of the parts, like any topic, you can just dive right into that topic. Right? Like you don't have to start at the beginning of this book and then go all the way through. If you're a parent who's struggling with, like how do I approach play? How do I approach integrity? You can just jump right into that section of the book. And you talk about play, which I want to get into in a minute, but you also talk about integrity in the book. Like how do we go about cultivating integrity, especially in a society that is run on a lack of integrity with our kids?
I mean, I think the only way is to act out of integrity as much as possible, always. And then, it's like the Mark Twain thing. How do you have a good memory? I never tell a lie. Because if you tell a lie, you have to remember what you said. Like if somebody said, "What's the color of your shirt?" It's blue. And then the same person asks me, 6 hours later, what color your shirt is. I have to remember that I said blue. Whereas if I said black, I could just look and say, I don't have to remember anything. And it's a much easier way to live to tell the truth. By the way, I'm going to go off tangent again.
Please do. I love Tom tangents. It's good.
This is what is so annoying to me about the health freedom move. So here's the opposite of integrity. So what we're doing, and there's very prominent people who say these exact, we're here to tell the truth and to respect the people. Right? That's what they say. So the way to do that is we can't tell them there's no virus because even though that's the truth, they wouldn't understand. They're not ready to hear that. And so we can't tell them that because then we're going to not win this thing, which we're already winning. So that's the opposite of integrity. So in other words, the way to get people to understand, to tell the truth and trust the people is by bullshitting them because they can't possibly understand what you're talking about, even though it's incredibly simple. That's how to teach somebody not to live in integrity.
You know what it goes back to on that too, and I'll add into your tangent because I've thought about this a lot, and it's coming from the perspective that the best way to obtain health and freedom is through fighting in one sense, but also through getting the authority figures to change their regulation. So because the authority figures play these manipulative games where they withhold information in some respects and they pick and choose what quote unquote truths to tell, then we need to play that same game too so that we can get them to change the regulations, and then we'll all be healthy and free. I had a conversation with, I won't name her name just out of respect for her anonymity, but she's really high up in the MAHA movement, let's say, right? And about 2 years ago, when everyone was getting behind RFK, and then the whole thing happened where RFK started supporting Trump, and everyone was making concessions like, well, I don't really like Trump, but because RFK is getting behind Trump, I'm going to vote for Trump now because this is going to finally turn things around. I was one of several voices who was like, that's not going to do shit. It's actually going to perpetuate the problem. And this individual was frustrated with me saying that because she's like, this is finally our chance to get in there and shake things up and change things. She calls me about 8 months ago, I want to say. And it's funny because she calls me asking for advice, like asking for my perspective on what she's dealing with in the political arena. And she's like, I'm in these meetings with people in the MAHA movement that are a part of the EPA or USDA or FDA who are making promises to us on one hand, and then right on the other end, the next day, turning around and making deals with Monsanto and making deals with Bayer and making deals with Pfizer and other things like this, doing a complete 180 on what they had told us. And it's incredibly frustrating because I thought things were finally going to change once we had someone in these positions who was quote unquote on our side. And what I did share with her, I said, luckily by virtue of, RFK being HHS secretary, I won't say it's all bad. One of the good things is a lot of these conversations that were previously fringe are now sort of in the mainstream, albeit superficial versions of those conversations. Like, no one's talking about the lack of evidence of germ theory in the mainstream, but at the least, people are starting to become accustomed to talking about these things a little bit more. But the whole point is, it's approaching things from the completely incorrect perspective that these individuals have the power over us. And in order to get things done, in order for us to be healthy, we need these individuals in power to change things around because otherwise we're totally helpless. Like, what happens when millions of people adopt that mindset? Like, think about that. It's wild to really consider that millions of people who are quote unquote fighting for freedom have adopted the mindset that the only way to be healthy and free is if one individual or a small handful of individuals are in a position to change things, rather than those same amount of individuals just saying, we're not fucking buying that food. Like, we're not going to buy that. I've even brought up this example with California because I understand with SB 276, SB 277, you can't send your kids to public school. First off, it's a blessing. You shouldn't have been sending your kids to public school anyway. So if you have to be forced into a position, you're a single mom of 3 kids and it's very challenging for you, ultimately, that's a good thing because we should have been going this other direction anyway. But in the same breath, those same people could very easily in California band together and say, look, we all send our kids to this public school, right? And they're saying that they need these vaccines. Let's all just pull our kids out of the public school at the same time. I guarantee you that public school or those policies in California would be brought back up like that, like, oh, shit, they're all no longer sending their kids to school. We need to reconsider this.
And by the way, we're not paying the property tax either.
Right. That's all it would take. It's just wild. It's wild to think about it.
And we don't care what you say.
Right. That's it. And it doesn't have to be this like big thing where you're protesting outside the courthouse. It's a simple, no, we're not doing that.
And it's the same with parenting too. It doesn't matter what the school people think. Like, I never went to a teacher parent meeting. I didn't care what these teachers, we ended up having to send our children to school, divorced, it's stuff,
Yeah.
I don't care what these teachers think of my child. I know who these children are. And, you don't need the approval. If you need the approval of these authority figures, that's the problem.
Yeah, 100%.
And that's their gig, is to make you think, keep you in that mindset.
Yeah.
Your freedom, exactly like you said, your health and your freedom come from what we say. Same with the parents. Your health and your freedom. No, it doesn't. Pumpkin would never buy that. He's like, what are you, some arrogant jerk? This isn't how you treat people you love or your good friends.
But you see the analogies with what we're talking about here, because it all comes back to parentifying figures in so-called positions of authority.
Yeah,
That's it.
it is.
And like what we want to do is raise kids who are autonomous, who have their own ability to navigate reality without having to be told something by an authority figure.
Right.
That's it.
And the only way to do that is to do it.
Yeah.
Is to let them. And, so what's your job? I mean, they don't have money. So if they're expressing an interest in riding horses or cleaning horses, you help facilitate that. You may have to get them there, and you may have to go to the people and say, my daughter's interested. And then what you'll see is they will help clean the stable, and they will do, age appropriate work, right? They can't fix the barn if they're 6, but they almost always will do stuff. If, I use the example of, it's also like discipline. If Steph Curry was going to teach 10 children how to shoot a basketball, and they got 10 children together, I can guarantee not one of them would misbehave.
No way.
Because if they did, and Steph said, I can't teach you if you're not paying it, the other 9 would say, you out, right? Like, we came here because we want this guy who's, he's time is valuable, and we want him to help us shoot a basketball, period. And if you're not going to let him do that, you're out. And if you think of how much different it is in the schools today, it's all discipline.
Yes, it is. Yeah.
They just telling them over and over, you got to do this, you got to do that. Instead of, we're here because we want to learn to shoot a basketball. This guy knows how to do it. If you misbehave, we are going to get rid of you. And I can guarantee no child will misbehave.
No. And if they do, they'll self-organize where they collectively tell that kid, like, hey, you get out of here, just like you said. They will do it on their own.
Yeah, and not violent. You get out, because we can't concentrate when you're doing that. It's stuff. And it's actually, in a funny way, becomes an ideal situation for a teacher, right? I'm going to teach you how to build tree houses, and I use the example, which was an actual example. Guy goes, a little boy wants to learn how to build a tree house. Guy goes, his parents, so they facilitate, they find somebody. He says, okay, well, so you measure this side and you multiply it by this side and you get the angle. And the child says, I don't know what multiply is. Teacher says, I can't teach you how to build a tree house until you know how to add or something. I can guarantee that child will go home to his parents and say, you teach me how to add in 2 weeks, or I'm finding somebody who will.
Right.
Right?
Right. Absolutely.
I want to build that tree house. And this guy who seems to know about tree houses, he said, you can't do it unless you know this skill. And I'm going to do it. And he will learn to add or multiply or read. My daughter, she couldn't read, and then she read Mists of Avalon because she was interested in some of the scenes, I guess, in there. That's how it works. That's how we learn, right? I want to know something. This guy seems to know it. So he's going to tell me, you got to look here and here and here. And then I ask him some questions, and he tells me straightforward, not grading you. If you want to know how to build a treehouse, you got to learn how to do a saw, and you got to sharpen the saw. It's just the natural consequence of that thing you're interested in.
I think a lot of what you're interested in too as a child comes back to obviously like your own innate desires that you're born with into this reality, combined with, I would argue, what you're exposed to as a child, like the whole breadth of possibility of things that you're exposed to, which then comes back to the onus being on you as a parent. How are you leading your lifestyle in front of your kids? And what are you exposing them to or allowing them to be exposed to within the parameters that you set, and then cultivating the autonomy within those parameters? Because, for example, like the video game thing, right? I have so many friends whose kids are struggling even worse than our kids are, just by, virtue of being exposed to other families that have video games, et cetera, et cetera. And it comes back to, well, did you expose them to video games at too young of an age? And now all of their ideas and thoughts about what they want to do in reality are tailored towards video games. And maybe they had a natural sort of artistic capability that came on that was a perfect match for what they were exposed to with respect to video games. And now they want to be a video game designer. And if you're upset about that, it then comes back to how you're leading your lifestyle and what you're exposing your kids to.
Which is a main point of the book, like I just said, too, exactly what you're saying. So your job, they wouldn't necessarily know that there's people plant seeds and grow carrots. So you don't do that. Now, they may not be interested in that. So you do it with tomatoes. Okay, they're not interested in it. How about painting like Vincent van Gogh? They didn't know there was such a thing. So you show them some hey, that looks fun. Can you get me some colors? Because they don't have the money to buy watercolor. Do you know anybody who can show me how to do that? Yeah, I have this woman. She's or building a tree house, or fixing a bicycle, or making a bicycle out of like spare wheels, or sharpening tools, or there's so many things that people might be interested in that they don't know about. And that's your job. What about some children love cats or dogs or riding horses or going for walks or pressing flowers or writing poetry or reading Dostoevsky? It doesn't matter. You just show them, expose them to the things that are interesting in the world. Like real things, building stuff, growing stuff. Animals are, prime. You got to show them what it is to deal with an animal, take care of an animal, interact with an animal. Children love that, and then can we move to a farm and have more animals? And then they spend, you got to clean the barn. Okay, I'll clean the barn. You don't have discipline problems because they want to do that. It's like shooting a basketball with Steph Curry. They're not going to tolerate like discipline issues with that because they want to do it.
Do you think sports is an important part of youth?
I mean, that's sort of all I did growing up.
Same. It's hard for me to imagine anything different. And I learned so much through sports about myself, about life. But, and we both share that we have a love for basketball and we played basketball growing up. But it's like, I wrestle with that question. Is sports, is team sports specifically, like a necessity almost for childhood? And I don't know the answer. Like I tend to say
I don't think it's a necessity. I think it's, there's so much of it that's corrupted today.
Of course.
But playing games with balls and stuff is, I think, a natural human activity.
Yeah.
So that's fine. And then if children want to do it more, and I mean, it's fun. It was fun playing basketball and challenging. And that's where I got to interact with African Americans. And that's where I got to be harassed.
You and I were both the only white kids on an all black basketball team.
Is that right?
I always show people that picture of me when I was younger on my 6th grade AAU basketball team. I'm the only white kid. I'm like, can you figure out which one's me in the picture?
Yeah, right. Yeah, I mean, it was great. It was rough too.
Yeah, right.
I mean, it was not easy sometimes, but I loved playing basketball.
Me too. Right. Yeah. I want to ask a few more questions. One related to education. I know you touched on it a little bit. Like ideally, what it would look like is that you're just helping guide your children to things that they're already showing inspiration to want to do. right? And there are so many people in this space who are sending their kids to nature-based schools, homeschool co-ops. I just would love to hear your take. Obviously, the public school system is not ideal, and there's a lot of parents who are like, I have no other choice at this point. I know I'm working 2 jobs. I'm a single mom. Maybe I can try to find some time to come up with a homeschool co-op, but I don't really know what to do. I would just love to hear your thoughts on, given where we're currently at as a society, right? There's the ideal and there's the where we're currently at. What does education look like to you?
I mean, it's hard. I'm not very good at, okay, Tom, you got to calm down and say where we're at. Is this
Right.
I say, look, education is Steph Curry knows how to shoot a basketball. You want to shoot a basketball, you get him or somebody like him to teach you how to do it.
Yeah.
And if you want to read Dostoevsky, that's fine too. You find somebody to do that. You just keep looking for your child's interest. Your job is to give them possibilities and figure out how to facilitate that, which sometimes takes money or time. And I mean, I get it, that we should have sympathy for the woman who has, divorced or single. And I don't really know what to do about that.
Yeah.
They just have to, but I can tell you
I think I know what to do. Tell them that, hey, what you're going to do at this school is understand that all the things that the teacher is saying is a joke. If you get in trouble and they try to say you have ADHD because you don't want to sit at a desk, there's nothing wrong with you at all. When you come back home, we'll talk about what you quote unquote learned that day and we'll make jokes about it. That's it.
That's it. And I think if, to a certain extent too, if there's stop with being guilty about it and just see it for what it is. I mean, I hear this so often. So, because I make fun of people who are jobbed, right? Who have jobs. I hate my job, but it's the only thing I can do right now. I don't really buy that. I mean, you think about, okay, so you mean you're spending your life, your precious life, 8 hours a day doing something you hate? I mean, at some point, if you can connect with what you're good at and what you love to do, that's where you'll find bigger value. And I think that has been sort of beaten out of us. Just connect with who you are, what you love to do, what you're good at. Everybody loves doing stuff they're good at for good reason, and figure that out and go for it. And I think when that happens, the world helps you out in a sort of magical way. When you're living out of such integrity that this is how I'm going to live. Next day there'll be, oh, you're a good painter. I got a job for you painting. And as long as you're willing to work, doing the garbage collecting, which you hate, and that's why you have to send your children to the public school, it's not going to work because there's no opening for this sort of world of intuition to come in and give you the next step. And that may sound like mean or condescending to people, but I also know so many people who've done that. I'm just not going to live like that anymore. I'm going to do what I do, what I love to do, what I'm good at. Next day they get the job or something facilitates that, and that helps their children have a better situation too.
You and I have done that in our own lives. You left being a physician and I left the Army. I could have been like, oh, I needed to stay in. I have kids. I got to provide for my
kids. Get a better
kids.
pension.
Yeah. I have no idea what the hell I'm going to do afterwards, but this feels right. And that's what I did. That's it.
I mean, I did that after, so I go to medical school and I go to 1 year of residency where they give you a license, but nobody stops their training after a year. And so I did because it was bullshit and I knew it. And I remember the exit interview I had with the director of my residency program. You had to go in. So I go in. He says, it never works for somebody who leaves after a year just because you have a license. You have to be board certified and do the whole thing. And you're never going to amount to anything. And I just said to him, you wait and see. And I left. And it's just, I had to do it because I knew myself and I knew I could not tolerate another year. And it was interesting because I had 2 children at the time. And I also had to pass another exam, a national board exam, in order to fully get my license. So I actually had to quit before I knew that I passed the 3rd exam, which was the hardest exam, and like only 70% pass, so 30% don't pass. But they stay in residency, so it doesn't really matter. But I was going out with no other way of make a living, with 2 children and a wife, and knowing that I had to pass this exam. And the interesting sort of corollary to that story is I somehow never once studied for the exam. I could not get myself to study for this. And I remember thinking, Tom,
You must have had ADHD. You had ADHD, Tom. That's what it was. You just couldn't focus.
Tom, if you fail you're in trouble. You got to study. And no, I'm not studying. I study homeopathy and whatever. So I knew, because when I was going into practice, I had to know stuff that I actually wanted to know. So I could not get myself, and I somehow passed. And so but there's a certain amount of trust and faith. And also it goes with your children. They're not savages. If you don't train them right, they're not. That's what people think.
As the mainstream system continues to tighten its grips on average men and women, with inflation running rampant and cost of living skyrocketing, it's becoming increasingly challenging for most people to make ends meet and to really maintain and expand financial abundance. And that's where I think it's incredibly important that we adopt and really start looking into alternative financial strategies, alternative ways to structure, and then some of these technologies that exist that help us expand and grow outside of these very extractive, exploitative mainstream system. So I'm sitting here with my dear friend, Otto Gomes from Crypto Freedom Academy, who would like to share a little bit about Crypto Freedom Academy and all of its offerings and what he teaches inside the academy.
Yeah, the academy, the main reason I created it is to create community. And I think that's the most important thing right now. The currency of the future is relationships. And the technologies that we have are only as good as those relationships. And so in the academy, I try to instill in everyone a sense of empowerment to know their current relationship to the energy of exchange so that we can attract more of the medium. I help you guys utilize the technologies that are available to us, like blockchain, trust and contract law, and how to do that privately.
So if you're interested in learning more about Crypto Freedom Academy and all the things that Otto offers and his depth and wealth of knowledge on the topic of crypto and financial structuring and passive income, check out episode 241 of the Way Forward podcast with Otto, or just head to thewayforward.com, and that's thewayfwrd.com/crypto freedom, or just head to the show notes and you'll find the link there.
I have 2 more concepts I want to explore, and one is play, which you talk about in the book quite a bit. And I think if I remember reading it correctly, like you talk about how you don't actually want to get down and play with your children as much as you might think, or something to that effect. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, I wrote that in the Nourishing Traditions of Baby and Childcare. I probably got more negative comments about that. Never play with your children.
Yeah.
Because mostly adults don't know how to play. Okay, we're going to play with the blocks. So here's how you do blocks. You do like this, and then you make them go this way, and then you do this way, and you got to make sure it doesn't fall down. And so what does a child do? You put some blocks, and they go like that.
Yeah. You're like, no,
That's called
this is
playing.
how you play with the blocks, right? Yeah.
This is playing, and you take the block and you throw it against the ceiling. That's playing with the. And no, you got to build. And you see this one, the red one goes on top of the blue one because they're complementary colors, and because the wavelengths are so, and the photons and all this stuff. And the other thing, I looked up the definition of play, and it's something like doing a useless activity to something. And nobody wants to do useless activities. Throwing a block against the window to see if the window will break is not a useless activity. It's inquiry into, if I take a wooden block and I throw it against the window, does the window break? And then, not only that, you get to have everybody freak out. Oh my God, we're going to have to clean this up and spend $1,000 on making a new window. And what are we going to do? And oh, wow, I'll just throw it at the window. This is great. I'm going to try this. What if I throw the whole bag and see what happens then? So it's not useless activity. It's how does the world work? And especially, can you get there's nothing more fun for a child than getting their parents' goat.
Right.
It's totally, that's a joy to behold.
This brings up another important topic too, related to the natural consequences of throwing a block and breaking a window and how they learn in that situation. What happens, right? Is a lot of people that are now parents who realize they were incredibly traumatized as kids to varying degrees. And I think the whole trauma-informed space has become so ridiculous. Everyone has so much trauma to look at these days, or so they think, right? And they're just obsessively revisiting that stuff. But that's a separate conversation, is that they almost want to prevent their kids from having challenging experiences. And from what I've gathered in your book and what I've sort of gathered in my own experience thus far as a parent, is you don't want to save your kids from every troublesome situation. You want them to have to learn on their own. And even if they ask to do something that, obviously within reason is not going to kill them, but it might cause them harm. It might make their stomach upset. It might cause them to break their arm a little bit or something like this. It's you want them to learn on their own the consequences of their own actions through exploration. And you don't want to try to save them from every possible traumatic incident. That in and of itself creates trauma, ironically.
Right. I mean, so on the one hand, you don't let a child who isn't old enough to ride their bike in the street and get hit by a car. That's common sense. But on the other hand, if you send your child who loves to play basketball into an all black, pretty tough, situation, and they're harassing the crap out of you, but there's one guy who's by far the best on the team, and he knows you're valuable, and you got to navigate that situation, and you might get punched and hurt and threatened and all that, but that was a big help in my life. How do you navigate that situation? And I wrote a story in the book when we had this, one of my grandchildren, Ben, was staying in our house, and for a while his mother was around, but so he would come over and he would draw crayons, just while we were cooking breakfast. So one day I hear, "Grandpa," and I knew it was different. And he said, "Yuck," because he couldn't say else. And he had drawn a picture on the wall, which was white. And that, I'm sure Grammy did not like that. And so I wrote about this. I could have said, "Ben, that's a bad thing to do," and all this. But he obviously knew it was quote, not good, because that's why he called me to yuck at it. And I said, I had the sense at that point to say, "Oh, well, why don't we go and get some paints and then we'll paint over it today?" And he was thrilled. And he got into the painting, and we painted it over and made it all look nice. And he never once drew on the wall again. And we made sure he had paper. And he figured that out right then and there. That was not good. You could also see the reason he did it. It looked like fun. He's got this white wall, and he made a picture on it, and then he probably thought, I'm sure I was supposed to do this. But all those things he knew at 4 or 3. He didn't need. That's why, and parents think I need to cognitively explain that drawing on the wall is no good and because it cost us money and blah, blah, blah. And he already knew all that. That's why he got me to look at it. But so you don't need to tell him that he already knows. He just needed a way to figure out how to deal with this.
Yeah. That's it.
That's a whole different way of seeing it.
Yeah. Amen.
So I don't think there was any trauma in that. I think he actually had fun.
Right. And again, even in situations where, like, for yours, for example, like getting roughed up by a bunch of black kids as the only white kid, it's like, as long as, let me put it like this. I can only speculate on how your parents were at that time, but I think the best way to navigate that situation as a child is help them understand, separate of that situation completely, that they are loved and valued in the home, so that they know who they are and they have that self-worth and internal value inherent to them, so that they're able to navigate these tough situations that human beings are going to confront in life. That's going to happen.
And you might ask them, do you feel safe? Or seem okay? And I did. I just didn't like it, but I knew that's what I wanted to do.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you're on their side. Do you need help with this? No, I don't want any help with this, because that would have been horrible.
Is that what you said to your parents too?
They didn't ask.
Okay.
It was like,
if they would have said, do you need help with this? What would you have said?
No.
Yeah.
I would have said, it's none of your business.
Yeah. The last thing I want to explore, because I've been exploring this a lot lately. I just interviewed Dr. Richard Massey, who is a practitioner in the Austin area. He's been practicing for 75 years, and he uses a combination of heart coherence with recall healing with family constellations. And one of the big things he talks about is what's passed down, not genetically, but energetically in family lines is a love story. Like, we talk about patterns that are passed down, like patterns of alcoholism, for example, or patterns of problems with health. And it's a love story because children are taking on that which their parents have not fully addressed in themselves, and then also communicating that through physical symptoms in many ways. And you explore this as well in your book. You just talk about it just a little bit differently from your own unique lens, but I'd love to hear about that. Like what dis-ease is with respect to kids expressing health issues, and how it relates to their relationship with their parents and their ancestors.
Yeah. I mean, everybody I know, including myself, has all kinds of stuff from our parents. Yeah. But this was, again, another lesson from a patient. So he was about 7 and probably one of the worst autistic children I've ever met. I mean, he was just, quote, really off the wall. He'd come in the office and he'd start tearing stuff around and ripping the paintings off the wall. And they tried everything, and somehow it hit me that because there was something off with the parents. And so somehow it came to me that he was acting this way to get your attention so you would do things differently. Particularly the parents sort of hated each other and eventually got divorced.
So even in their own relationship, like that thing, like it was quite literally pertaining to their relationship with each other. Wow. Yeah.
And so he's just, he's not the problem. He's just telling you what the problem is. And as soon as I said that, this guy who didn't talk to you at all, he stops ripping the room apart and sits down in the chair next to his parents, folds his hands over and looks at him like, so what are you going to do with this?
Wow.
And I said, okay, from now on, we're not going to do anything to him because he's not the problem. It's just like, if you vaccinate a 2-month-old, they're going to scream at you. Why? To tell you that you can't do this anymore. It's probably not good for you because you're such a dumbass that you're probably getting flu shots. But you keep doing it, 4 months, 6 months, next thing, and they're not listening to you, so you up the ante and then you start banging your head against the wall and doing like this. And then they call you autistic. You're just trying to get their attention. And you don't know how to write an essay with all the research from Aaron Siri about the vaccines and all, because you're only 8 or 8 months old or whatever. So he was acting this way to bring attention to that this isn't right the way our family's doing. He immediately stopped acting like that, goes like this. And then I said, well, okay, you guys are going to do such and such and such and such. And here's the way you're going to eat. And then he can eat what he wants because he wouldn't eat anything they told. They told me that he went home and said, because he could talk, he said, could you ask that doctor what I should eat? So I told him, eat the GAPS diet. And before he wouldn't eat anything they said. Now he ate the GAPS diet. And, like literally 6 months later, he was almost normal, like pretty much normal. And they cleaned up their life. Eventually they got divorced because you could see it was not his problem. He was like if you're going to poison me, I'm going to scream because I got no other way of communicating that this is no way to live, think, or treat other people. And you're the ones who are making this decision, and I'm going to make your life miserable. And so I'm going to not breathe well. They call that asthma. I'm going to cough all the time. And that's going to make you stay up at night. And eventually, if I'm lucky, you may think, I think there's got to be a better way. And that's what a lot of parents say. My children were the catalyst for me thinking there's got to be a better way. And it's because they, out of their love for you, are willing to sacrifice their own health so that you have a better life. Because they know you're a dumbass, and you don't get it.
I love you dumbass. That's essentially what they're saying.
Yeah, but you got to stop doing this. And of course, there are actual repercussions of what they're doing as well. So there's some unraveling of the poisoning that needs to happen. But I can tell you, when you stop putting it's your problem, you're sort of a genetic mutant, or you got some genetic cause of autism or something, you stop doing that nonsense, they will eat what you say because they don't care what they're eating. That was my conclusion. Just like the Swazi, they slimy porridge and greens, and that's what they eat. So you give them the GAPS diet, they eat the GAPS diet. What difference does it make? It's just food. And then they go and play and they have a better life, and they don't fight with that because they can feel that this is getting better. And I don't need to teach them a lesson anymore because they seem to be getting the hang of it. And so now we can try to work on this together. And that's a much better way to live. We're in this together. We're a family. We're going to figure out who can do what to make life work for all of us.
It's so interesting because it's such a flip on what we're taught in allopathic medicine and even so many forms of alternative medicine, that something is wrong with the kids when really the kids are just mirroring back patterning, whether it's what you're feeding them, what you're injecting in their body, what quote unquote medicines you're giving them, or what's wrong in your relationship dynamic or what you're struggling with internally yourself as an individual who happens to be their parent. And they're just mirroring that back to you.
Yeah, no, and it's not any of that. It's the adenosine precursor of your mTOR pathway that has messed up the hypotenuse of the homunculus. And you have to buy this supplement and that'll straighten it all out. And you don't have a clue what I just said. Neither do I. But that's the way we're going to do alternative medicine. Functional medicine.
The most dysfunctional form of quote unquote medicine ever.
It's the worst.
It's worse than allopathic medicine. It really quite literally is because it's cosplaying as natural. It's ridiculous.
At least the allopathic doctors have the sense to say, we don't friggin' know what's the matter, why anybody has asthma. It's probably genetic, you know?
That's so true.
Whereas the function, you know, it's always your mTOR pathway.
Yeah.
It's messed up. Then you have a hyper expression of the RAS2 gene, which downregulates the RAS1 gene, and then you can't breathe. So you got to take extract of.
I'll tell you this, Tom. When I interview people that which is very rare, but when inevitably, because unfortunately most people don't think like us, and that what you're saying is straight bullshit. I don't claim to know exactly what it is, but I know it's clearly not that. How did you validate that, right? When people that I interview start talking along these lines, I feel a little Tom Cowan devil on my shoulder that's nudging me to be like, well, how do you know that? And sometimes I do. Sometimes I'm just like, I'm just going to let them go. My audience already understands by now. So, but
no, the best thing is to accentuate it.
Yeah.
Are you sure it's the mTOR pathway and not the mTOR subset 3A? Because I saw this study that said that when the mTOR 3A pathway increases the adenosine guanidine, that's batshit ratio, that the batshit then climbs down the cyclic AMP pathway and makes you wheeze. Are you sure it's not that? Well, yeah, there's some good studies on the guanidine adenosine cyclic AMP RAS-TOR MCAT pathway. I read it on Mercola.
Right. You remember that quote study that Mark Cartamone sent us?
I don't.
About, I'm not even going to say, not farts, but something else. Anyway, yeah, that almost seemed realistic, which is hilarious because it is so nonsensical.
No, there was actually this study out of Oxford University that they've discovered that the hydrogen sulfide gas in farts stimulates neural activity in the brain and is helps with prevention and treatment of early onset dementia.
Wow, that's incredible.
But the best thing about that story, which is so typical, is the very next week, NASA came out with a headlines saying, we found the same gas, hydrogen sulfide gas, in the vicinity of Uranus.
That just shows that, like, at some level, they know it's such nonsense, and they're like, how much nonsense can we put out that so many people be like, yeah, this new study, wow, we need to synthesize this compound and make a supplement for it. This is incredible. Maybe this will be a new nootropic.
Yeah. I don't say this publicly much, but the only job I would switch for what I'm doing now is being a writer for NASA. I swear to God, I would do it. Because I can imagine sitting in the room with these 10 other people.
Yeah.
And you come up with, they had this other one about headlines. NASA is going deeper, is about to go deeper in your anus than ever before. And so you get to come up with this stuff, and then the other night, Tom, they're never going to buy this. They're going to know you're just fucking. No, they'll buy it. Look, if I put it in a study.
That's my point. Is like, see how ridiculous you can get, and people will still buy. I bet they're cracking up. I bet they think it's the best. That's the best job ever.
Yeah, it would be such a fun job.
And they have billions of dollars in their budget to be able to write whatever the hell they want.
I know. It would be so much fun. Tom, they're never going to buy it. Yeah, they will.
We should make a petition for you and Mike Cardamone to work for NASA. That would be the best combination.
Yeah, I would do it. I would integrity. Screw it. I'm just going there. And they had the latest one was they found another planet in the solar system, and they showed a picture. It looks like just a giant breast. Got, the nipples and everything. And I can just imagine the guy who came up with.
That's hilarious.
Say, yeah, like they're never going to buy this.
Right. Exactly.
They're going to know you just met. Yeah, they will. They'll tell you. We'll put it in Scientific American. They'll buy it.
Right. Yeah. Oh my God. It's hilarious.
Yeah, I'd love to do that with Mike.
That'd be the best. That'd be so good. Okay, Tom, back to the topic. Is there anything else that stands out that is top of mind with common sense child rearing?
No, just don't screw them up.
That's it. Don't screw them up.
That's it. Don't screw them up. Yeah, but it was a fun book to write, so people should take a look at it.
Awesome. All that will be in the show notes for people who are interested. I can't recommend it enough. Again, I really appreciate the way that it's laid out. I already know I mentioned this before, but how any specific topic that you're interested in exploring, like what's Tom's take on this? You can just dive right into that section of the book. And you talk about it, and the way you communicate, you make it so easy for people to understand, for any lay person to pick this up, because it is common sense. It's like you don't need to use these big quote unquote scientific words to explain things. You don't need to refer to meta-analyses. It's common sense.
Yeah, you don't need to know about mTOR pathways to know what to do.
No.
It turns out they don't even exist. They made it up.
Are you sure that that planet doesn't exist though?
Yeah, I'm not. My guess is it doesn't.
I don't think so either. All right, Tom. Thank you so much. It's always a pleasure chatting with
Alex. All right. Take care.
Talk to you soon.
Bye-bye.